Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm always excited to record, but I am particularly excited to record today because I have my friend Brooke McCarthy on the show with me. How are you?
Hi,
It's so good
I'm
to see
so
you.
good. I know, it's so good to catch up.
Yeah, so we met doing a show, God, like a really long time
2017, I
ago.
think. Yeah.
A really long time ago. And yeah, that was a fun journey in and of itself. But we've stayed in touch, and you have had this incredible journey since that show.
Yep.
Tell us, a little bit about that. Tell us about you, who you are.
Yeah, so like Rachel said, we met, oh gosh, back in 2017 doing a show in Jersey.
Insane. Insane.
Yeah, it's wild how time flies. And around that same time, I was auditioning for grad school. I was working in corporate America and, good at my job, but just like my soul was unhappy.
Yep.
And so I decided to audition for grad school. And then I ended up going to the University of Georgia, where I got my MFA in acting. And so that took me out of Philly/Jersey. And that's sort of where the journey began for what is leading us here to talk today, which is my one-woman musical comedy show called How to Be an Ethical Slut. And so I actually wrote that in grad school. And then after grad school, I started touring it around to a bunch of different festivals. And, I continued to edit and develop it. And I've had a lot of fun with it and good success, I'm pretty proud of it.
Yeah, and I got to see the show maybe like 2 years ago. And fun fact, the day after I saw your show, I met my current partner.
That's amazing.
So yeah, funny. I think about that show really fondly because I'm like, I had no idea that my life was going to change course the next day.
I
So
love it. It's magical.
that's kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so your show is called How to Be an Ethical Slut. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I like to say my little one-liner is experience the ride of your life as an unethical slut penetrates lies, STDs, triads, and orgies in her musical journey to becoming an ethical slut.
Wow. That is a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. There's a lot to cover in it, but it's essentially just like a journey of one woman sort of exploring and understanding her sexuality through the lens of non-monogamy.
Sure. And what gave you, I mean, obviously you were, honing in on this and focusing, but what gave you the idea for this to be the topic of a cabaret?
Yeah, so I feel like everyone has a little bit of COVID in their story, but
Everybody.
Everybody, I know. It's like, well, and then there was COVID. But so when I was in grad school at UGA, during your third year of grad school, you usually do a thesis. And so I was supposed to be in a play, and it's usually meant to be a role that's really challenging to you. And so obviously when COVID hit, all of those were canceled. And so our professors were like, you should find one person shows to do. And I was like, okay. And I started reading a bunch of one person shows. And nothing was really like resonating with me, and nothing really felt appropriate for the time. Like the world was experiencing a lot of grief, and I felt like there needed to be some levity, and also for the purposes of challenging myself as an artist, I felt like I needed material that was really deep and that really pushed me and pushed my own boundaries as a performer. And that all of that timing sort of coincided with I was in a queer theater history class, which was
Cool.
just an incredible and really powerful and moving class. And during that class, I was reading the book, The Ethical Slut, which is different than my show, but obviously sort of inspired by my show, which I'm sure we'll touch on. So I was reading that book and processing a past non-monogamous relationship that I had. And then when we were sort of given this opportunity to do a one-person show, and I wasn't really finding anything I liked, I decided that I would write my own show inspired by my own life, this very interesting chapter that I had sort of just come out of, so to speak.
And yeah, I mean, it's a great show. I mean, first off, it's very, very funny. It is informative, and just like a really, really good time. So, and I love that that's the story. It's always COVID first, right? And then you
Right.
go from there. But you mentioned that has a similar title, though not the same. It's not the same thing as the book, The Ethical Slut, which is by Janet Hardy and Dossie, I think Dossie Easton.
Dossie Easton, yep.
Yeah. And so how did that book kind of inspire you in your journey and the show?
Absolutely. So some people do get it confused because they're like, oh, I've heard of that. I'm like, no, you've probably heard of the book, which is called The Ethical Slut. And then there's like a subtitle, which is A Practical Guide to Polyamory, Open Relationships, and Other Freedoms in Sex and Love. And so
I like your little tag better.
Thank you.
Personally.
Thank you so much. Yes. But yeah, so it's a really excellent book, and it sort of became the framework for polyamorous or non-monogamous lifestyles. It gave sort of language definitions, how-tos around, this very non-mainstream way of having relationships. And that really resonated with me because I remember like being in relationships and having crushes on other people, but feeling like, what is wrong with me? I love my partner. I like them, but I have this little crush. And so that book and the whole world of non-monogamy really just like blew my mind because I didn't know that those things existed. I didn't know they were possible. And, part of that is, I think, growing up the way that I did, which isn't a bad way to grow up, but also not being exposed to things. And I think it kind of makes sense that society sort of exposes us to like one way of living. There will be a man and a woman who will get married. And it's like, oh God, no, that is not all that there is.
There's so many options.
There's so many options. And so the book just really validated what I felt and what made sense to me. Like, I feel like I am a person who has the capacity to love more than one person. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a way that other people feel. I'm not just weird. I don't just need to shut that down. And so that book was, like I said, it sort of really opened up my mind. And then obviously that played a huge role in my show because a lot of the teachings of the book really informed how I structured the arc of my show.
Right. Yeah. You go through a lot of different processes in the show. Like, there's a section about discovering what non-monogamy is. There's a section about like trying like swinging. There's a section about all of these things. So it really is. And I think, I always say this when it comes to non-monogamy, the umbrella is a lot bigger than we think that it is.
Absolutely. It's
not just like one thing. It's
right.
Multifaceted entirely. But another thing that's multifaceted that I think we should touch on early is that you are not playing yourself.
Yes.
In this show.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you bring that up because a lot of people will get that confused because, especially people who don't know me, right? Because Brooke McCarthy, which is my name, and my character's name, Blake Valentini, sound similar on purpose, right?
Right.
And yes, I created a character, and I always say that the show is inspired by my life, but the show isn't 100% my life. It is not a fact. It is not an autobiography at all, so to speak. I mean, again, there's a lot that, I'm happy to sort of touch on some of the parts that are true and that are not. But when I wrote the show, I wanted to give myself as the actor and the playwright that degree of separation. So Not only I could make artistic changes to better the story and the message, but also to give me that emotional safety that I could step in and out of the role.
Absolutely. And I love that. And I think that we as actors face that a lot. I remember when I was like younger, I would feel bereft when I wasn't in a show. And I realized that it was because I was so uncomfortable being Rachel.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And
wow.
Like how that fits and how stepping into a role does allow you some separation from your everyday life. And so I completely understand why you did that. Sometimes I wonder if maybe I should have done that with this show instead of being myself.
Right.
But so you picked the name of Blake Valentini on purpose.
Yes.
And when you do the show, just to like really drive this point home, you have a sign that you have on the stage next to you that has the name Blake Valentini.
Yes.
So that is all very out there. Now, I don't recall, do you talk about the fact that you're a character in the show?
No, not in the show. No, when
Okay.
I walk on stage as Blake Valentini. And
Okay.
yes, and I'm glad that you remember that sign, because that was something that I added like later on as I was touring it, to just sort of help differentiate that, because people were getting confused. And I had some awkward or negative experiences with people like trying to ask me on dates, and I'm like, no, that is not what this is about. Like, I had a few awkward, creepy moments like that. And so I was like, what can I do to sort of help drive home that this is a character? As soon as I step on stage, I'm Blake Valentini, the performer, right? And so yeah, so that sign is just one of the only physical, tangible things that people can see, other than me playing my character and having things like in a playbill about it,
Yeah, and people who follow along your journey know that you wear the same outfit most times, right? So
right, yeah. Which is, so yes, I have a costume that is Blake Valentini's costume, but it's funny because I actually want to change it. And
oh yeah,
I've worn it. First of all, I've worn it so much, and I'm kind of. It's not that I'm tired of it, but I'm kind of tired of it.
Yeah.
And also, I have one of my new and dear friends who was a colleague of mine at Virginia Tech, where I was just teaching for the last year. Her name is Sarah Elizabeth York, and she actually lives up in PA too.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, so she's bringing a new direction to the show, which has just been absolutely wonderful and fabulous, and I'm so grateful for her. But one of the things she and I were talking about is like, what is Blake Valentini's costume? Because my first draft of the show, I actually wrote in the stage directions that Blake Valentini comes out in a gown, like a super elegant gown. Yeah. And part of that was to sort of play on the stereotype of slut, the word slut, and the negative connotations that it has, and to come out not looking like what people expect, not coming out with the boobies out, with the fishnets, and ultimately I ended up not ever wearing a gown, not even for the debut performance of it while I was in grad school, because I dance in the show too. And I move around a lot. And so I just felt like a gown wasn't really going to be practical. And so I don't know, I've been trying to think of some ways to sort of, is there a part where I can do this like costume transformation? And Sarah and I have been talking about that. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I see what you mean. That's really a cool idea, though. It's like we're going to subvert what the expectation is.
Exactly. Right. It's like reclaiming the word slut, which is what Dossie what Easton and Hardy do in their book. They have a whole beautiful like opening intro somewhere about reclaiming the word slut and how powerful that can be, like how how the word queer was reclaimed back around in the 80s, I believe. And so there's just this really beautiful idea of the reclamation and really owning that word. And so I was thinking a lot about sort of flipping that narrative on its head. But all that to be said is, yes, I wear a costume the whole time.
Yeah. Another way to separate Brooke from Blake.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Well, now that we've established that Brooke and Blake are separate people, walk me through the show a little bit. Like, what are some things that you touch on? I mean, and you add them with like really neat. You do a Frozen. You sing a Frozen song, but with different lyrics.
Oh yeah,
which just cracks me up. Just but walk me through like kind of the journey of the show.
Yeah, so when I wrote the show, I actually wrote it in 6 parts. And at some point during the journey of touring it, I realized that using the titles are actually a really nice separator for the audience to understand the journey of the show. Because doing a one-person show, sometimes it can be really hard for the audience to sort of grasp and receive what's happening. And so it's really good to have these like flags or markers. And so I started actually bringing in the titles of each section. And so I will go through them because I think that's useful for the journey.
Sure.
So part 1 is how to be an unethical slut. Part 2 is how to be a dumb slut. Part 3 is how to be a slut in love. Part 4 is how to be a smarter slut. Part 5 is how to be a wild slut. And then part 6 is how to be an ethical slut. And so even with that, you can sort of get a sense of the journey that the character goes on.
Yeah, and I like that too, that, I mean, I think that a lot of people, I have never dabbled in open relationships, but I think that I've talked to a lot of people, and what I've gathered is that there is a lot of tripping before you like catch your stride.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of, I mean, you talk in the show about how you were with a partner, but you were being attracted to other people, and when they told you that that was okay, it was just like this moment that was like, wait, it is?
Yeah, it is mind-blowing. And I think, and what I also really love about the book, The Ethical Slut, which sort of plays into what we're talking about, is how they say, you know, you can be a monogamous slut. And it is also a spectrum. Like, wherever you are in your sexuality, in your relationship style, whether it's monogamy or polyamory or something in between, which I literally say in the show, like, that is perfectly valid. You can still be a slut. And I just really appreciate that in the book, and sort of that with life, because we have different chapters of our life that sort of that may be more appropriate or more welcoming to certain styles of relationships.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And so on the journey of becoming an ethical slut, what are some of the potential pitfalls?
Yeah. So something that I've never really talked about in any interviews is part of the show starts, especially the how to be an unethical slut and how to be a dumb slut. Both of those first two parts are actually about cheating. And yes, those are part of the tripping moments of like trying to figure out how non-monogamy works. And it's really interesting because the way that I wrote the show, I never say the word cheating on purpose. I never say that word because it has such a negative connotation. And I think some people who don't understand what non-monogamy is just assume it's like cheating with an excuse or something.
Yeah.
Which obviously is not what it is if you do your research, you know. But some of those earlier journeys and even, you know, some stuff in real life, it's imperfect. And the first part of how to be an unethical slut is literally about so I'm talking about the characters here, right? So there's my character is Blake, and one of the first characters I talk about in the show, his name is Benny. And so Blake starts talking about Benny, and how they were sort of drifting apart and they decided to go their separate ways. And then she starts bringing in the character of Guy. And Guy is the main character in the show that she's in a non-monogamous relationship. And so what actually happens in the show, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but that's okay, is that she starts seeing and dating and essentially she starts dating and seeing Guy before she's totally ended things with Benny. And so I strategically put that in the show to show my audiences that you're going to make mistakes before you figure out how to do it. And it's also to show that like the state that Blake starts in is imperfect and she messes up and she doesn't know she's young. Right. And so you know, that first chunk of the show is about how she was cheating on a boyfriend of hers that she really liked with this new interest of hers, you know, and that's sort of part of I have this new interest, but I love this other person. And I didn't know that both things could be true.
Yes, and it can be. It's, again, such a spectrum of opportunities, truly a buffet. Yes. And so from moving, if I recall, it's been a minute since I saw the show, but if I recall, Guy is the main person who helps Blake kind of through this journey of non-monogamy, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Guy is the main love interest in the show, and when Blake meets Guy is the person that sort of opens up her mind and her world to non-normative relationship styles. And before that, she had no idea that these things existed and that they were okay, which is very similar to Brooke in real life me, of like, when I started understanding that there was more options out there, my mind was blown. And so and that person is based on a real person. That is something I'm absolutely comfortable sharing. You know, like that Guy is based on a real person. Obviously, I did take artistic liberties to sort of change up some of those details because I don't think people necessarily need to know who he is in real life. That's not important, right? But Guy is based on a real person, and for Brooke, there was this moment of, oh my God, I didn't know these things existed and people would be okay with it. And so that I wanted to represent that moment in the show, show of just that, whoa, there's a whole world of things out there. And so, yeah, so Guy is sort of bringing in all of these other, he starts to bring some other ideas in about different relationship styles, but he essentially he allows her to explore those things for herself and with him.
Mm-hmm. Which is honestly like one of the most loving things that you can do, right? Is just to give somebody the freedom to understand themselves better.
Yes.
Like without judgment,
amazing.
You know?
Yeah. It's like that judgment. There's this level of like safety and like being able to be that transparent with your partner that you can talk about other things and other people and it's not shameful and it's not wrong. It's not bad. It's not a sin or whatever it is, right? Is so freeing. And it really allows, Blake as the character to sort of blossom, so to speak. And that same thing sort of happened in my own life, though my own life was a bit more chaotic and like there was less of a perfect arc, There's lots of up and downs.
Yeah. So is life.
Which is why I always say life is chaos and art needs to have a little bit of structure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also subjective, but in my case.
For the sake of an audience going on a journey with a character, I can see why you need to have a little bit more of an arc because you want to have a neat and tidy ending. Although I do think that where you're at now in your own personal life is, I mean, maybe nobody's life is ever neat and tidy, but you have you have a happy ending.
I do. Yes, a happy ending. Some other roadblocks or bumps on the road, so to speak, in between that chapter and now. But yeah, there's light.
Absolutely. So. Okay, so how to be an unethical slut and how to be a dumb slut. What's next? I'm like, for the sake of structure, let's walk through
absolutely. Let's do it. So unethical slut, then dumb slut. So dumb slut, I will just touch on too, because dumb slut is actually, she's with Guy, and Guy is super accepting and embracing of these things, but she doesn't really know that yet, and she doesn't totally understand it, and so she ends up cheating on Guy with Benny. So it's, and then he's, so there's that like reverse cheating that happened, and then what's really cool is Guy doesn't get mad at her for it. He's just disappointed that she tried to hide it. And with non-monogamy, I mean, you really can't hide or lie about anything. Like that is against it. That is when you get to cheating, right? And so those first two chapters or parts are about, cheating and sort of working through that and figuring out what is okay and what isn't.
Right.
And then
what are the rules? And each couple has their own rules too, right? Like it's not a one size fits all.
It is not. And with each couple, each person has their own boundaries. Each couple should have their own, relationship agreements. And there's so much to it that requires so much communication. And that's hard for people. People don't like communicating. They don't like talking about things that make them uncomfortable. And that's why I think people who practice polyamory or non-monogamous, I mean, I feel like we have some thick skin because we worked through some really shameful, bad moments, poor decisions, but we've also been able to sort of get to the other side of that to be able to be like, okay, this isn't going to be this isn't going to be a fun conversation, but it's a necessary conversation we need to have to move forward.
Right.
Which actually gives you a lot of growth.
Yes. And again, like one of the most loving things that you can do is to have that safety and place to explore uncomfortable feelings together.
Yes. I mean, I always say, the one way that I've grown as an artist is to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And
I just said that to my brother today.
Did you?
Yeah.
I love that phrase, and I don't know if it's cliche or corny, and I don't really care if it is, because it's helped me to grow not only as an artist but as a human, and especially in regards to non-monogamy. I mean,
absolutely,
there is a lot of discomfort that comes along with it because it's just not the norm. We just don't know.
Right. So
so we have
non-ethical slut,
unethical slut, dumb slut.
What's next?
And then slut in love. And so maybe a bit self-explanatory, but that's sort of the moment when Blake and Guy realize that they are in love with each other. And there's a jazz medley that I sort of put in there. I also, one of the things that in each act, there's usually a song or two that sort of reflect the message of that act. And so that love song sort of buttons that part of it up to just show that. Because too, it was really important for me for the audience to love Guy and for the audience to see that we're in love and that love is real. because otherwise people would just, they would judge, or they wouldn't, or the message wouldn't be clear of like portraying polyamory in a positive light. It's all based in love to me.
Yes. And I think it's tough, because I think that a lot of people assume that it's sex.
Right.
But, and you know, it doesn't help that there are people out there on dating apps like giving non-monogamy a completely bad name by being like, oh, I'm non-monogamous. My wife we haven't talked about it yet. And it's like,
no,
that's
cheating.
You're just an asshole.
Yeah, literally.
But the people that I've spoken to who, you know, talk about non-monogamy, talk about having so much love to give.
Yes.
You know?
Which I think is beautiful. I mean, in what world is more love a bad thing?
Right.
And it's also not wrong if you only have the capacity to love one person. And I don't even like how I just said that. Like, if you only love one person and that's all that you want and need or whatever, that is also beautifully acceptable and perfectly lovely. But there are also other people that, like, we do love other people. I remember you saying on the podcast that you did with that other person recently.
Jess.
Jess. That you're like, I'm like in love with my friends. And I feel like I love that so much, because I often tell people who try to understand polyamory that, you know, you have more than one friend, right? And so you have a friend, like I might have a theater friend that I would go to watch a bunch of theater shows with. I might have a friend that I would go get cocktails with. I might have a friend who I used to work in corporate America, who I would like talk about work finance things with, right? I have all of those different friends, and they all serve a purpose. I'm not going to call up my finance friend and say, hey, go see this Broadway show with me. I mean, maybe they would, but realistically, like, I'm going to call my theater friend, you know?
Right.
And so I think it's really interesting that a lot of times people will expect their one partner to do everything. And I think that that's why polyamory is great, because you can have more than one partner that sort of satisfies different needs.
Absolutely.
And not that you can't get that from friends either, but I think that, you know, love is a spectrum. And I know there are other cultures that have more words for love than we do. And I think that's beautiful.
Agape, Felicia.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that there are so many ways to love that is not just, I am sexually in love with you. Like, there's just so much more.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I always think about that when I think about non-monogamy. And I always think too, it's like, okay, well, it's a spectrum. It's not just open relationships. You know, I always say, like, I'd be willing to explore something with my partner, like in like a sex club, you know, even if I'm with my partner, you're opening your sex life to other people there. That's not monogamy. Like, you know, and so it's a layer. So maybe, you know, I don't ever want to have multiple partners, but that's okay, because I'm still exploring, you know, and even if I did want to have just one partner, that's fine too. Or I feel like I'm not explaining myself right, but
no, I know what you mean.
Basically, it's a spectrum, and it's not, non-monogamy isn't just having an open relationship or swinging. It can take many different forms. So
absolutely,
I think that's important to cover. Okay.
Yes.
So we have slut in love.
Then the next is how to be a smarter slut.
Okay.
Smarter being the key.
I was going to say smarter, not smart, period.
Yeah, smarter, because so this is the moment when Blake is starting to understand how non-monogamy works and the level of communication and clarity and sort of checking in with your partner that needs to happen in order for it to not be cheating. And so she has an experience. She's like on a work trip, and she has a crush on someone, you know, some sexual tension, and she wants to act on that. And so she's telling the person, his name in the show is Austin. And so Blake is telling Austin about her relationship with Guy, and Austin is actually super interested in it, and he's super interested in non-monogamy. And so they're talking about it, and then at some point, you know, one thing leads to another, and he asks her if he can kiss her. He asks her, you know, there's consent here. That was another thing I wanted to cover in the show. There's consent. And so he asks her all these things, and one of the things that she does is she actually takes a moment to step away and text Guy, hey, I just want to check in. Is this cool if I go on this date and have this experience? And so this is probably another spoiler. But you find out later that she did not actually ask him. She did not actually check in with Guy about that. She sort of pretended to do it, but she chickened out in the moment because she was starting to get it. But then she had that fear that it wasn't actually okay.
I didn't remember that until you just said that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of snuck in there. And I've also edited and developed that chunk of the show to make that a bit more clear. So for people to understand that, like, no, she didn't actually end up texting Guy. She pretended like she did. She was pretending to be Polly, and but then she got scared, and that's such a human response. It's such a vulnerable human response, in that when you're doing something new, it is scary. And so that's sort of the underlying goal of that act, is to show that she started to learn, and she's learning enough that she can talk about it, but she wasn't able to fully implement it because she panicked and fear,
Intellectually, the thought, I should do this is protocol, this is the right thing to do, that was there.
Yeah.
But the emotional follow through is tough. Yeah.
It was tough. Right. Especially when, thinking about like what the repercussions of that going wrong could mean for a person. Right. So thinking about Blake as a person, being like, God, if Guy is not okay with this, then we could be over. He could be mad at me. He could hold this against me, or he could say no, and I don't want him to say no because I want to be able to do this thing. So there's so many things that like a human experiences that I was trying to sort of encompass in that one act of how to become a smarter slut.
Yeah, that's a lot in one thing, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So she doesn't end up telling Guy. And that moves us into the next part, doesn't it?
Which it does move us into the next part. So then the next part is the swingers club bit.
Which I think this is the other part that I like. This is the song I think I remember best, actually.
Oh, yeah. It is one of my favorites to perform, and people lose their minds over it because it's so unexpected.
I also think that at one point we talked about swinger clubs in real life. Just the curiosity of it.
Yes.
Yes.
It is a fascinating thing that exists. And yes, it is real.
It is real.
It is real. They're out there. And so what happened in my real life that inspired this part of the show is that I met a friend through theater who was talking about these experiences that he and his wife were having. And my mind was blown. I was like, what? This really exists? That's so crazy and so cool and fascinating. And so then I went home, opened an incognito window on my phone, and started Googling it.
There you go.
What? And so, I found, so I was living in Philly at the time, and there was, from what I remember, there are two pretty prominent sex clubs in Philly. And so I was reading all about them, and my partner at the time, who was, Guy, essentially, I was like, hey, did you know that these things existed? And he goes, oh, yeah. And I was like, of course you do, because he is a much more, poly person. He's been groovier for a lot longer than me, so he's in the know.
He was your Yoda, your poly on Yoda.
Exactly. So I sort of brought my curiosity to him, and that led to us sort of having some conversations about, well, maybe let's go, because he had never been either. He knows people who have been and had partners who had been, but had never actually been himself. And so there's actually a whole chunk of the show that I have since cut because just time and momentum and things like that. But
you're on stage for an hour just talking and singing by yourself, so yes. Understandable.
Yeah, I mean, when I debuted the show, it ran about an hour and 20 minutes, and now it runs 55. Okay. So I cut a lot, and one of the big chunks was actually this whole, what my whole real life conversation was based on, and how important it is to have communication and set your boundaries and come up with your relationship agreements before you go to a sex club with your partner. And it's super important, and I wish I could still be in the show. Maybe one day I'll find a way to bring it back in. But, having those conversations about, all right, let's do our research first of all and figure out what is it like to go to one of these clubs? Like, you know, let's look up some reviews and make sure we're not going somewhere super sketchy. Like, how safe are they? How legit are these things? And I was coming from a place where I had no knowledge. So I needed to just understand. And and then once we sort of understood some bits about it, we had our own conversations about, well, what are our expectations? What are our personal boundaries? Mm-hmm. Our personal boundaries can be different. What I would be okay with, he might not be okay with, vice versa. What is the most that we are willing or unwilling to do? Like, and so I remember the first time that we went, we literally said, we are just going to be voyeurs. We are just going to watch. We can be intimate with each other if we feel so inclined, but we are just going to understand. And that was a really great first boundary to have, because I think otherwise people would jump in and make rash decisions that they could later regret or feel uncomfortable with, or, you know, be unsafe or whatever. And so, all that to be said is, like, before going to a swingers club in real life, and even in a part of the show that has since been cut, it's really important to have those conversations. And I think that's just, it's such a deep and intimate experience to have with your partner, to be able to, you know, talk about those really awkward things.
And being able to, like, do that too, you have to be really good at saying, no, thank you. Like, yes. You know, because I, again, never been to a swingers club, curious. But, and good to know that there are 2 in Philly. But, you know, I probably would do the same thing. It would just want to be a voyeur to start off with, and then, you know, see how I felt from there. But you have to be really good at saying, you know, like, dick is offered. Oh, no, thank you. Like, you know.
Yeah. And it is wild. They're really cool though. I mean, you know, to tangent about them in real life, like, they host a lot of events. They do have a bit of a paywall. You have to you have to pay to be a member, because those kinds of clubs are like members only based, but usually it's like a flat fee and you're like a member for the year or something like that.
I mean, I like that, because I don't want just some random people who don't understand consent walking in. I would rather have people who are willing to put in money, because I'm like, okay, this is something you care about, something that you hopefully, you know, probably have done more research on. You're not just coming in to be a creep. You're coming in because you know how this works and you have an experience. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's 2. We'd gone to both. The one that I liked more, I will say the name, is Pleasure Garden Club. And I have not been there since before grad school, so I don't know what it's like nowadays. I hear it's still thriving, but what I really appreciated about what they did was, when you are a new member and you go in and you sign up, they actually give you, like, I don't know how to word this sounds better, but they give you a couple who, like, walks you around and who's very experienced and can show you all the things. And it's just kind of a really nice way to be like, here's a real human who can talk to you and answer some of your questions your first time here. And I was like, oh, this is really thoughtful. And I think that, you know, polyamorous people, non-monogamous people, I think we have to have a level of thoughtfulness to look out for each other and respect each other. And so I did really appreciate that about Pleasure Garden Club.
Okay, good to know. I don't know if I'll be able to actually put it in the episode notes, because censorship when it comes to sex is annoying. But sure. I will at least put the name of it so people can know. Yeah. Okay, so what's next?
Okay, so we have the whole swingers club bit, which is a wild time, and then after that is how to be an ethical slut. Well, what I didn't touch on though is I think your favorite part of the show, in the swingers section, which is the parody song. So yes, the parody song that always people lose their minds over is from The Mouse, and it is from Frozen 2. And so I have a whole parody song to one of the most popular songs in Frozen 2. And I won't say too much more, but people will often say, I can never listen to that song the same again. Because we're going into the unknown. Which is into the
unknown with a lot of detail.
Oh, yeah.
Not shy.
Yes. Oh, and actually, I want to touch on something else about that part that I think one of your questions was asking. And it's about like any sort of like aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that song, one of my favorite lyrics of all the parody lyrics I've ever written is the line, "Her lips are soft and tender, and she touches me sweetly. Who knew deep down I liked girls this sexually?" So in that one line, I sort of tried to capture my aha moment of like my own bisexuality, which I did not understand at the time.
Right. So that was the moment where you were like, okay, so you were exploring polyamory, and then you're like, oh wait, this is another piece.
Yes, I was like, oh, I'm not, because at the time I still thought I was heterosexual, and I started identifying as like a sexually fluid person. Like I thought it was just sex based. And so then in that song, and in real life, you know, having my first intimate experiences with a woman besides just the kissing and making out,
right?
Like I was like, oh, this is different. And so that was very much an aha moment that I was sort of able to bring into the show.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's important to mention because we focused a lot on the polyamory bit, but we haven't focused as much on the, you know, the fact that you are more fluid than, you know, maybe it seems like at first discussion from this show. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the swinging leads to, it sounds like that actually might have really been a turning point into the ethical.
Absolutely. I think
because it's something that required such intense communication between Blake and Guy.
Yep.
You know, that it really feels like it's the turning point from, you know, figuring it out to like, okay, you got the steps here. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a liberating part of the show, and even the characters' realization, and even some of the real life realization of, oh my God, we just did this. We were just able to do this super awkward, intimate thing. We were able to talk about it. No one got mad. No one was hurt. No one did anything that they were uncomfortable with, because we talked about our boundaries and what was okay, and we had our own relationships agreements. We had our own, like, what is okay for us. And that was such a powerful moment, because it was like, oh, you're not just going to run away. You're not going to hang this over my head. You're okay and accepting of it, and therefore of me, and you're validating who I am and how I feel. Right. And my feelings. And so that is absolutely like the super liberating moments. Because up until that point, a lot of the things that happen in the show with Blake and Guy are separate of each other. And so the wild slut part is them doing stuff together, which I think was really what allowed them to be like, oh, we're okay with this.
Yeah. Because once you see your partner, you know, maybe engaged with another person, it's like, okay, that's a new level of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So if you can work through it, then it helps to solidify the other parts of non-monogamy that maybe aren't together.
Yes, exactly. And being like, okay, we can have this conversation. If we were able to do all this, we can have this other awkward conversation. And so, yeah, that is absolutely a turning point in the show. And that leads into the last act, which is how to be an ethical slut. And I've given a lot of spoilers. I won't give a different spoiler, but
we will not spoil the end of the show.
I won't spoil the ending, so that way you can come see it. But she has some revelations. Blake and Guy get really close. And ultimately, the show ends. I'm going to skip some stuff because, we're being ethical and not wanting too many spoilers. But ultimately, she gets to the part where she's able to call out someone else for being unethical in their sluttery. And sort of own, I'm an ethical slut now. And, the finale of the show just is like a jazzified version of I Am What I Am from Lacage. And so that's sort of just like her own anthem of I'm coming out as polyamorous and or non-monogamous, whatever, and owning myself, and love is love and all of that.
Love it. Yeah, it's such a I do like that you split it up into sections, not just for the purposes of this conversation, but also for the audience. I just feel like, I don't know, we like neat. And when the topic of the show is like being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and that's such a big theme throughout the show. It's almost like having like neat little sections helps the audience a little bit. So it's like, all right, we have a shape here. We have a shape.
Exactly. There's a shape and there's a message and there's something to learn from each part. I mean, yes, it's entertaining, and yes, I wanted it to be funny, and I, sing my face off at times, but, it was really important to me that even if you do not identify as a non-monogamous person, even if you're just polycurious, and especially if you're monogamous, there is so much that you can learn from the mistakes that happen in this relationship, that happen in monogamous relationships as well.
Absolutely.
And that honesty and communication and transparency and talking about boundaries and awkward things and being able to talk about sex and what we like is so important. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship you are in. I do genuinely think that each of those sections anyone can take something from.
Absolutely. And so exiting the show and going back to you as Brooke, no longer Blake, how has the experience been freeing for you to write this show and to put this all out there and to, get feedback? I think most of your feedback is positive, but I mean, I know you and I both have had some creeps come out of the woodwork to...
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
we've been talking about sex. It means she's interested in anyone.
Right.
No.
No. I'm like, did you not hear the show?
I'm like, you didn't listen. I half the time I'm like, you hear the title of this podcast. I don't even think that you listen. Same thing.
I really think the same thing, and I've had it happen. Oh my gosh. There was actually a show that I did, and I won't name the city that it happened in just because I just don't want to throw that under the bus, but it was a city I was in. I had a friend there with me, and I usually am doing these things by myself. And there were so many people after the show that were not only asking me relationship advice, and I'm like, I'm not a therapist. And the most I tell people is just communicate, be honest, but people who were trying to ask me out on dates to the point where I'm like, I feel like I need security to walk me out of this building. I was like, well, everyone calm down. Yeah, that was wild. That was a really weird show.
It's kind of icky.
Yeah. But
I will ask where it is after we record.
Okay, yeah. I'll be here. I'll let you know. And I mean, for the record, I actually want to go back to that city because I had great ticket sales, very slutty city. I loved it.
Great.
But it was just I think I need some security.
Communication. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. And so in general, the feedback has been positive. Despite some people taking the show as an invitation.
Yes. Yeah, I will say I feel very fortunate that it's been received with such positive feedback. I think some of the most powerful moments, some of the most moving moments is after a show when I have someone come up to me and they thank me for telling my story because they feel, validated, or they've been polycurious, or they just in general, just thanks for bringing a story on stage that is more taboo. I mean, it's becoming less and less taboo, but, I think those are really powerful moments when I find my people who just can't believe that I put this on stage. And that's sort of why I did it, right. I wanted other people to be able to see themselves on stage the way that I was not really seeing myself in queer narratives, which goes back to, my queer theater history class I took in grad school. I was like, I feel like I really resonate with these people, but at the time I was like, I felt like I was hetero. I knew I was sexually fluid. I thought being polyamorous was sort of being in the closet for me. And so it was super important for me to find that bravery that I saw in the playwrights throughout history who were putting on shows and telling stories that were quite frankly illegal and getting them in jail and in lots of trouble and hurt. And it's just, I wanted to have that same level of bravery to be able to bring that to other people like me.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's why I do this, what I'm doing here too. And, you've been working on a new show, which kind of is a similar thing. Putting your story out there and putting it out there so that people can see themselves represented in a way on a topic that is difficult and still taboo to talk about, even though I think we're getting better. So tell me about the new show and what that has been like.
Yes. So my other show in development is called Gaslighting the Musical. and it is a circus
Awkward
of
laugh.
the mind. Yes. Because just the title itself just makes me giggle because it's like, wait,
Woo!
what? But yeah, I call it a circus of the mind. And it's about the darker side of relationships. And essentially this is another chapter, a very, very dark chapter of my life that I wanted to bring to light on stage, to shed light on emotional abuse in partnerships, domestic violence, narcissism. And so that I'm in development with. It will be another one-woman musical comedy, but obviously a dark comedy.
Right.
Not quite as sexy as Ethical Slut, but hopefully still catchy and interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I love dark comedy. It's my preference.
Yeah.
So.
So, I mean, I'm super excited about it. I actually have 2 original songs. So my goal with this show is that it will be all original music, whereas Ethical Slut has parodies to Broadway music. It has some covers. It does have 2 original songs now, and it has jazz music and pop music. So there's a whole bunch of music in Ethical Slut, which is why it's more of a cabaret,
Right.
which is like, a smattering of different genres. And Gaslighting will be all original. And maybe at some point too, I'm gonna keep making Ethical Slut more and more original. But right now, my focus will be on making Gaslighting musical super original.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible, and I am super excited to see it when it is up and moving.
I'm trying to do it.
I'm like I can relate to parts of that story, so I'm like, and I unfortunately think that a lot of people can. So I'll be really interested to see how that kind of unfolds for you.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do at least debut the 2 songs that are written. Right now I call them the opening circus number song and then the sad song. So like I have 2 very different songs that sort of give parts of the vibe of the show. But I'm hoping, I live in Charlotte now, and so I'm hoping sometime this year I'll be able to at least sort of workshop them somewhere. So
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here if you need to run through things or
thank you.
Well, Brooke, where can people find you? Where can people catch the show? Where can people keep up with you to see what's coming out for you? Tell us where you are.
So, yes, I actually the day that this airs, I will have a show in Charlotte at the Comedy Arts Theater of Charlotte, also known as Catch. My show will be on May 31st at 8 p.m. Tickets are $20. You can find them online. And the easiest way to find any information about my show or my shows is on Instagram. So my Ethical Slut Instagram is at How to Be an Ethical Slut. I am pretty active on there, so you'll always know when there's a show upcoming and what city I'm in. And if you have any requests for me to bring it to a city, message me, let me know. I'm happy to find some more places to visit. And then also for Gaslighting the Musical, if you're interested in watching sort of the development of that, you can also follow me on Instagram at Gaslighting the Musical. So those would be the easiest and best ways to find me.
Fun. Thank you so much. This has been so fun. And I know we're going to hit stop record and we'll probably keep talking. But thank you for letting me pick your brain, for going over the show, for the spoilers. And honestly, like I've seen the show. It might be a bit of the spoilers that you gave might be bits of spoilers, but it does not detract from the show. So I definitely can vouch for How to Be an Ethical Slut. Go see it in a city near you. And thank you for being here today, Brooke.
Thank you, Rachel.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. You've been listening to Wine, Dine, and 69. I'm your host, Rachel Dalton, and let's keep talking.